All right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. John Rothstein here on this new podcast venture with CBS Sports. This is the last day of March, and we have a loaded show for you. Later in the show, we are going to be joined by Florida head coach Todd Golden, who obviously led the Gators to the Final Four for the first time since 2014. Also want to make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you're linking, obviously, everything up. We are also going to be diving into everything that's going on in the Final Four, but make sure you hit that subscribe button. Again, the YouTube page is obviously giving the live stream of the show. There's a lot to get to, but first, let's get to three big things. And the first thing I want to talk about is why the 2025 Final Four should be celebrated, because it is all four number one seeds. Sometimes the NCAA tournament, a lot of people look at as something of being a Cinderella run, having a necessity to it. There is no necessity for the Cinderella runs in the NCAA tournament, because when I look at things as being exceptions, and that's what makes them special. Every single year, Fairleigh Dickinson is not going to beat Purdue. Every single year, St. Peter's is not going to beat Kentucky like we saw in 2022. But when you look at things now, and you look at the trade-offs, people from the periphery have said that, quite frankly, there's not enough Cinderella in the 2025 NCAA tournament. But the trade-off for that is you have these made-for-TV matchups that cannot be replicated. You have some of the best brands in the sport, and you have storylines on top of storylines. Now, only one other time have all four number one seeds been in a situation where they have advanced to the Final Four. That happened in 2008 when UCLA played Memphis and Kansas played North Carolina. Where was that Final Four? It was in San Antonio, ironically enough. Now, the big difference in this NCAA tournament and the 2008 NCAA tournament is real simple. Look at the Elite Eight matchups that year. North Carolina beat Louisville, 1 seed versus 3 seed. Kansas beat Davidson and Steph Curry, and Davidson had that incredible run to the Elite Eight with Steph Curry. On the other side of the bracket, Memphis beat Texas, 1-2 in the Elite Eight, and then UCLA beat Xavier, who was a great team coached by Sean Miller out of the Atlantic 10. The only big difference in 2008 versus 2025 is the Steph Curry run at Davidson. I acknowledge that. But even with that said, I am going to remain confident that the people who enjoy the best playing the best are going to embrace all that comes with the NCAA tournament. In 2008, people, and this was all pre-portal, pre-NIL, we're not talking about the lack of upsets beyond Davidson. So this year, we shouldn't be in a situation where we're really lamenting the fact that we haven't had, other than McNeese or maybe New Mexico, who beat Marquette, a real Cinderella run. So another thing I want to get to, as storylines now start to move forward, one of the major storylines we are going to get into this week, and you're going to hear it all week long in terms of the Final Four, is the relationship between Auburn head coach Bruce Pearl and Florida head coach Todd Golden. Now, when Bruce Pearl became Auburn's head coach in 2014, he was putting together his first staff, and he hired Todd Golden, who was at Columbia at the time, working under Kyle Smith, as his director of basketball operations. Todd Golden then ascended to the San Francisco job when he worked for Kyle Smith. He was the associate head coach there. He then obviously went from San Francisco to the University of Florida. That's going to be the dominant storyline in that game, much like we have seen coaches who had ties to a boss and they've played in the past in the Final Four. And it's happened before. In 1991, Roy Williams was coaching Kansas. Kansas was playing North Carolina, coached by Dean Smith. Williams worked for Smith. It happened in 1992 when Mike Krzyzewski, who worked for Bob Knight and played for Bob Knight, was coaching Duke, and Knight was coaching Indiana. These are all things, obviously, that are going to come to the forefront. Golden, something of, what's the word for Todd Golden? I've compared him to Mark Zuckerberg a little bit because he is an analytics guy. He is somebody who, before the age of 40, has ascended to this incredible place in the college basketball landscape. He is to Florida basketball what Mark Zuckerberg was to Facebook. That's what it feels like. Deep in the analytics, deep into all that stuff. But he is somebody, again, who was given an opportunity for the first time to be a part of Power Conference basketball by Bruce Pearl. That's something that will dominate headlines this week in San Antonio and beyond. And we've got two teams from the SEC, this conference that has had a renaissance, 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, the most all time. The SEC is making up 50% of the Final Four. And the matchup is going to be, obviously, Golden against Pearl, teacher against pupil. And on the other side, and the third thing I want to get into, we have an epic, epic game between Houston and Duke. And sometimes every couple of years, we have a Final Four game on Saturday in the late window that feels like a prize fight for the heavyweight championship of the world. That's what Saturday's game feels like between Duke and Houston. The Blue Devils are ripping through the NCAA tournament like a chainsaw through butter. Put up 100 against Arizona. 7 points was the difference in that game. Weren't really threatened. Alabama came into that game off a 113-point performance against BYU and made 25 threes. Duke held Alabama to 65 points. They can do it on offense. They can do it on defense. The most talented roster in the sport. Loaded with NBA prospects. But with that said, Houston is the model college program. Houston has went into the Big 12 and in 2 years become the Big 12's flagship program. Everybody loves to talk about, and there's validity to it, well, you need pros, obviously, to win at the highest level. I don't see, the surplus of pros on Houston that I do on Duke. And I think you can say that throughout college basketball. The experience that is needed to win at the highest levels of college basketball also needs to be taken into consideration. Now, to win a national championship, do you need guys who are going to play in the NBA? Absolutely. Look at the last couple of national champions. UConn, Klingon, Castle, Newton, Spencer, Jackson, Hawkins, Sonogo. Look at Kansas, Ochai Agbaji, Christian Brown. Look at Baylor, Davion Mitchell. But Houston, while it has some players who will play in the NBA, has the ultimate team. This game has the feel like other great Final Four games have the feel. Like in 2004 when UConn played Duke. Like obviously in 1991 when Duke played UNLV. It has the feel. It has the feel big time. And it feels like the buildup to a Tyson Holyfield type prize fight. Those are three big things. Now here's another big thing. We're going to break some news here in about 30 seconds. Providence transfer Bryce Hopkins, who again has been limited for the past year or so due to a knee injury, one of the top transfers in college basketball. We're going to announce his decision in 20 seconds. He has visited recently Georgetown. He played at Ed Cooley under Providence. He has also visited recently St. John's. And Bryce Hopkins, the best front court transfer right now in college basketball, has made his decision. And next year, Bryce Hopkins, according to a source, will be playing at St. John's for Rick Pitino. So now all of a sudden, you have a scenario where Rick Pitino and St. John's are adding Bryce Hopkins, and also Bryce Hopkins is going to pair with Zuby Ejiofor in what will be, in my opinion, unequivocally the best 4-5 combination in college basketball. St. John's had a season to remember this year under Rick Pitino. St. John's had a season that, again, has been lacking for this program for quite some time. Over 30 wins. Big East regular season title outright for the first time since 1985. 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. But with what we've seen right now from Rick Pitino and St. John's from a recruiting perspective, there is no doubt in my mind that the talent base is only going to continue to improve. Bryce Hopkins, Joe Zansanin from Arizona State, already in tow for Rick Pitino out of the transfer portal. So now, if you're taking inventory, and I got to say this, I rank 45 teams each week. Each week. I always do it during the college basketball season because there's so many good teams. I go 45, not 25. Putting together a roster is the most difficult thing to do right now when you're trying to project things for next season. But St. John's right now, even though R.J. Lewis, is going to enter the NBA draft, Big East Player of the Year, you have a nucleus in place where St. John's is going to have up front the best power forward center combination in college basketball with Bryce Hopkins and with Zuby Ejiofor. Simeon Wiltshire, if he's back, is a capable guard. Jozon Sannon, obviously from Arizona State, is a capable guard. Rick Pitino's team, I'm sure, will add more. But right now, the story broken right here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page, Bryce Hopkins, according to a source, will play for St. John's and Rick Pitino. St. John's, again, dominated the transfer portal last year. And St. John's also is in a situation where, look, the bar is being raised. This was a program that up until a couple of weeks ago had not won an NCAA tournament game since 2000. How long ago was that? Jay Wright was still the head coach at Hofstra. But with what we're seeing right now out of the transfer portal, St. John's has already loaded up its roster with Jozon Sannon and with also Bryce Hopkins to join a nucleus of Zuby Ejiofor, who, again, will be a preseason All-American in my opinion. I want you to hit the like button. I want you to subscribe as well. I want you to get into the chat. We are going to hear from you next. What are your thoughts on the Final Four? Who do you like in the Duke-Houston matchup? Does it matter to you that Duke has more NBA prospects? And also, what are your thoughts on Kevin Willard at Villanova? What are your thoughts on what's next at Maryland? I'm going to get into all that and more. Your questions are now the priority. But the news broken here is substantial. Bryce Hopkins from Providence, a transfer who I had no doubt about it would have been right there for Big East Player of the Year honors if he did not get injured, has committed, according to a source, to Rick Pitino and St. John's. The floor is yours, America. Now take it. Your questions when we return. John Rothstein here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. We sleep in May.
This is what you were made for. I was made for this.
All right, I'm back here. I want to make sure that obviously I get to all your questions right now. This chat is absolutely on fire as we are getting everything you need and ready to go. Let's get right now to our first question. These questions are flying in. And also want to point out that Mike Rapoli and his commitment to St. John's has been a game changer for the Red Storm, the proud alum who obviously made headlines with Vitamin Water and now at Noble. Sam Kinney wants to know, John, what does Houston have to do to beat Duke? Well, one thing that I think, needs to be addressed when you look at this matchup, Houston is not going to out-talent Duke. It's not going to happen. But Kelvin Sampson, for years, has beaten teams that had more talent and more draft prospects. And I've talked about this for a long, long time. You are seeing a situation where Kelvin Sampson, if you think back to 2022, which ironically enough was Jay Wright's last win at Villanova, Houston made it all the way to the Elite Eight, and that year had lost Tremont Mark and had lost Marcus Sasser to season-ending injuries. Houston did it with smoke and mirrors, and then still found itself in a scenario where it was in the Elite Eight. Now, who did Houston beat in the Sweet 16 that year? The number one seed, Arizona. Who was on that team? Dalen Terry, Ben Mathurin, Christian Coloco. Kelvin Sampson, and this is the mark of a truly, truly great coach, a Hall of Fame coach, does not always need the best players to win. Keep going through right now. A lot of St. John's fans in the chat right now. Very, very excited. Wall Street 79 is saying St. John's will be even better next year. Look, the St. John's fans have a right to be ecstatic right now because you got the best front court player in the portal. There's no doubt about that. Nobody is denying that. But I do want to point this out. Guard play was the reason why obviously St. John's was in the situation it was in last year. So St. John's, in my opinion, needs to continue to shore up its perimeter. That's going to be a major, major factor for St. John's moving forward. I know that reportedly Silas Demery from Georgia plans to visit St. John's next week. But St. John's needs to continue to rectify the perimeter, which I'm sure they will. But you are looking right now, and this is the big thing I want to say, 4-5 next season, there will be none better than St. John's with Hopkins and Ejiofor. Both players will have an opportunity, in my opinion, to be preseason All-Americans for the 25-26 season. LM is saying Florida is going to win it all. Walter Clayton, the GOAT. I don't disagree with you on that, but Walter Clayton's starting to look like the best guard in basketball. We're going to get into Walter Clayton, remember, in just a little bit. Todd Golden coming up, the Florida head coach, in our interview in a little bit. Moving forward right now, Ozzy7 wants to know, or Azaz7, who is Maryland looking at in the process? Well, this is what I can tell you, and I want to say this. My heart breaks for Maryland fans right now. My heart absolutely breaks because some of my good friends are Maryland alums. And in doing this job now 20 years, I have looked forward to making the drive down to College Park for games, for practices, for all of it, and sampling that fan base because that fan base is incredible. That fan base is unbelievable. That fan base deserves weeks like it had last week. But the thing that really I feel bad about is because of everything that was being obviously aired out in the media through Kevin Willard and his frustrations with Maryland, those fans did not get to experience the type of Sweet 16 week, a place where this program has not been in a year during the NCAA tournament. This should be a time to be excited. This should be a time, obviously, to be in a situation where you're basking in the glory that you made the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. That is not what happened. Maryland fans were very frustrated, and they're going to continue to be frustrated. Now, from what I've gathered, this is what I can tell you. Maryland does not plan to use a search committee to find its next head coach. Maryland does plan, in my opinion, to be very, very active and try to move swiftly in this. A lot of people at Maryland have done recon on a number of candidates. Buzz Williams' name has floated up for this job. I know Maryland has done a lot of research on Buzz Williams. Tony Skinn from nearby George Mason, who did an incredible job, the Atlantic 10 Coach of the Year, is also going to be on the short list for this job. But I don't have, as of right now, as of 4:52, somebody you say, that guy's the target. A couple of years ago, you knew Kevin Willard was the target. You knew it. And that was kind of played out during the NCAA tournament. But for the Maryland fan right now, I think you have to look at what's going on. And you don't want to make the wrong hire, but the urgency to make a hire and make a hire before the latter part of the week has never been more, in my opinion. This is what I'm going to tell you. If you're a Maryland fan, look at what's happened. You were having a dream season. It looked like you were in a scenario where you could make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. I thought that Maryland was a dark horse Final Four team. Your coach, who you want to sign to a long-term extension, loses his athletic director. Then, all of a sudden, your coach, who you want to sign to a long-term extension, decides it's better to be in this current model at a Big East school like Villanova rather than be at Maryland in the Big Ten. So your coach then leaves to take the Villanova job and in turn depletes the roster. Earlier today, it was obviously, announced on Twitter by multiple outlets that Rodney Rice and Jacoby Gillespie are entering the transfer portal. I'm not saying that the next Maryland coach can't get those guys back, but Maryland's program has been ruptured from where it was a week ago. You have no head coach. You have no athletic director. Now you don't have anybody else. Nobody else. Let's keep going right here. Let's see what else we have here. Shamrock Mark says Johnnies are going to be a much better team next year. Well, I need to see the pieces in place for that to happen. But I do want to point out that St. John's has made major strides. No team right now in college basketball so far, since the transfer portal opened, has had a better run than St. John's. None. Zero. St. John's is coming out swinging. And with Mike Rapoli, with somebody who obviously is invested in making sure that the front porch of the university for St. John's, which is the men's basketball program, is in the best shape possible, St. John's is going to be a player. And a major player. I'm diving in, obviously, to everything, I'm doing for my Rothstein 45, which I will release next week after the Final Four. And that's going to change 50, 60, 70, 80 times between now and the start of next season with transfer stuff, with NBA draft stuff. But right now, unequivocally, St. John's is a top 10 to 15 team to start next season. Unequivocally, with Hopkins and Ejiofor. 2 players, not one, that will be preseason All-Americans, in my opinion. Jozon Sannon is a player, I think, that, again, will get better under Rick Pitino. Simeon Wilcher is a good piece. There's other good pieces, but St. John's is going to add more. But a major, major statement today, major statement by Rick Pitino and St. John's. The best front court player, Bryce Hopkins, who started his career at Kentucky, went to Providence, has battled injuries, is going to play for St. John's. The dream of St. John's and every program is to be playing in the Final Four. We are going to talk to a head coach who's in the 2025 Final Four. His name is Todd Golden. He's coming up next right here. John Rothstein on CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page.
We dig it. Do you? The Pro Volleyball Federation on CBS Sports Network.
Florida is back in the Final Four for the first time since 2014, and their head coach, Todd Golden, now joins us. Todd, welcome. How would you describe the last 48 hours?
It's been pretty amazing, man. Pretty special. Obviously, really proud of our group and survive and advance, man. Big games this past weekend in San Francisco. Thought we played great against Maryland and had some issues against Texas Tech, a great club. But at the end of the day, our guys found a way.
Todd, I know that the stage obviously speaks for itself, but in all your time in basketball, have you ever been a part of a comeback like the one you were a part of on Saturday?
Not, maybe one. On my first year at San Francisco, we were at Fresno State. I think we were down 7 or 8 with a minute and a half to go, and came back and found a way to win in regulation. And similar feel, similar vibes, but obviously under those circumstances, with an opportunity to go to the Final Four on the line, that was by far the most special one.
So you're down 9 points with just about 3 minutes to play, and it feels like nothing is going your way. What did you say to your team?
Well, first of all, Tommy hit that 3 right before we used our last timeout, and that got it down to 6. And at the under 4 minute media right before that, we just talked about staying the course. And obviously we knew we had to play better. We weren't making enough winning plays. We weren't executing well enough offensively. We weren't getting enough rebounds. And, we just talked about how, time was of the essence. And if we didn't start finding a way to execute a little bit better, we were going home. And, it certainly didn't hurt that we made our last 4 threes in that ball game as well.
Did you feel a little bit extra magic because the site was San Francisco and that was such a big part of how you started your coaching career?
I don't know if we pulled any extra magic from it, but it definitely made it even sweeter to do it there. I was fortunate enough to have a lot of friends and family in the building, and felt a lot of great support from the city all week. And, for our guys to be able to experience being out there and kind of being around another basketball family and to be able to become victorious was just amazing.
Well, it's also sweeter to do things like this when you have guards like Walter Clayton Jr., and you have said repeatedly that he's a first-team All-American and the best guard in the sport. But as you watch this unfold from your vantage point, what was it like seeing him make some of the shots that he made down the stretch to erase that deficit?
In those moments, and it's what makes Walt special, he's able to just kind of contain his emotions and never get too high and never get too low. And, as he's proven over these past couple of weeks, no moment is too big for him. And you always want a veteran that's experienced, that's a great player to be able to lead your team in those moments. And, Walter's done that for us all year. And so when he pulled that first 3 and knocked it down to tie the game, and then we go down 2 and he dribbles it back out and, stops and pops off a quick kind of 180 turnaround. Those are big time shots that only a big time player like him can take and make.
And, the interesting thing about Walter Clayton Jr., and it obviously goes in line with a lot of the players on your roster, is he is a mid-major transfer who put up big numbers at the mid-major level and has had no drop-off as he's transitioned to power conference basketball. I remember talking to you 2 years ago when you were putting together your transfer class, and we were talking about, at least from my perspective, whether or not these guys could produce at the high major level. What did you see, and not just Walter Clayton Jr., but some of the other guys that you added to build this roster, Will Richard and others, that made you think that this was the way that you could bring Florida back?
Yeah, well, you hit it first. All of these guys that we've been fortunate enough to add were high-level producers at their previous stops, regardless of where it was. And I think the next kind of, intangible or variable that we've noticed as well is that we've been able to get guys from really good programs, and they've been really well coached before they got to us also. You look at Walter, obviously he comes, from Iona and had the opportunity to play for Rick Pitino, one of the best coaches, I should say, in our sport. Obviously Zion Pullen played for Mike Magpie, one of my great friends at Riverside, who just got the Fordham job. Micah Hanlockton played for Dan D'Antoni, a guy that had a lot of NBA experience. Tyree Samuel played for Shaheen Holloway, a great competitor, at Seton Hall. And the same goes for this past year. Elijah Martin played for Dusty May at FAU, and they had great success in the tournament. Ruben Chinyelu played for my mentor, Kyle Smith. The list goes on and on. But, just being a part of really strong programs, coming from programs where they've been coached and hard coached before, it definitely makes the transition easier. And I think those guys have been really successful for us.
Your tenure at Florida is never going to be the same again moving forward, because you have joined at a very young age an elite group as a coach in the Final Four. How do you plan on balancing recruiting moving forward, the portal versus the high school world?
Well, I'm going to add one more element to that. Our own team is going to be the first element of that, just making sure we can do everything we can to retain the talented players on a roster with eligibility. And we have a lot of those guys right now that we're going to focus on and make sure we take care of first. And then, we'll continue to fill in with the portal where we see fit. We have some really talented high school guys that are signed and ready to come in as well. And that's going to be a balance, and that's going to be year to year, so to speak. But our goal is to always have a great nucleus within our program here at Florida, guys that are kind of growing from within. And, seeing guys like that have good success has been a big part of our success this year.
So much, Todd, especially this time of year as we get into April and May, the transfer portal is something that dominates the headlines with graphics, with edit videos for commitments. But I think we're seeing now in this climate, especially with the teams who are in the Final Four, Houston, Auburn, and Florida, that retention deserves more attention. How much does the fact that you had this nucleus of players, the majority of them, on an NCAA tournament team a year ago factor in to Florida's ability to really hit the ground running at the start of this year?
I think it's everything, and I can't remember if it was you that tweeted it or somebody mentioned, that 3 of the 4 teams in the Final Four this year have, somewhat around a 70% retention rate from last year's roster, something like that. Obviously Duke is much lower, but when you can recruit guys like Cooper Flagg and Maluach, that changes the game a little bit, but for my program, for Bruce at Auburn and for Coach Sampson at Houston, they're doing it with a lot of guys that have been in their program for a number of years. And that retention piece, I think, is very valuable right now.
You did not win an NCAA tournament game a year ago. You told me over the summer that the Colorado game haunted you for a long time after that. How did this group get to the Final Four after not having an NCAA tournament win on its resume prior to this season?
The hunger and just having that chip on their shoulder from falling a little bit short last year in 2 ways. We lost an SEC championship game to Auburn last year, and then we move on to the NCAA tournament and fall to Colorado. We felt like we had left some things on the table last season, even though we had a great year. And again, that retention piece, bringing a big nucleus back of young, hungry guys that wanted to be able to take the season further. And then add in, Elijah Martin and Ruben Chinyelu, Sam Alexis, guys that had success and could bring another layer of just toughness and physicality to our crew. Made us a complete group. And, our senior leaders have done a great job in the backcourt all year. Our young bigs have been phenomenal and have been a huge part of our success. But just kind of the continuity piece, as well as the guys that we added, just gave us that complete team that's allowed us to make a deep run in this tournament this year.
When you're the head coach at Florida and you've embraced this, you know that you are sitting in a seat where one of the best to ever do it has sat in Billy Donovan. I'm curious, have you talked to Billy since the win on Saturday, and do you plan, if you haven't talked to him, to reach out to him on how to deal with this week moving forward as you enter your first Final Four?
Yeah, he's been awesome about checking in with us after, some of our big wins this year. I haven't talked to Coach since we moved on, but I'm definitely looking forward to catching up with him this week. If his time permits, because obviously this is a new experience for all of us, including me, heading to the Final Four and getting to compete. And I know there's going to be a lot of media attention. I know there's going to be people pulling us a lot of different directions, and we got to do what we can to make sure we keep the main goal. But, getting a little advice from Coach Donovan certainly couldn't hurt this week.
Well, the great part is Florida's going to the Final Four. I'm sure something that's tugging at you inside is your opponent, and your opponent, Auburn, is a place, I'm old enough to remember when you were the director of basketball operations in your first power conference job when you left Columbia. That's a place that's very special to you, and the head coach is somebody in Bruce Pearl who gave you your first shot at the power conference level. What are the emotions like knowing that you're not just going to coach against your friend and mentor, but you're going to do it in the Final Four?
It's crazy, to be honest. Yeah, I think if we would have said this at the beginning of the year, a lot of people would have laughed at us. That we would have been meeting in the Final Four. Surreal. As you know, Bruce is one of my mentors, and his son Steven's one of my best friends. And I've FaceTimed with Steven last night after they got the win. We were just sitting there shaking our head, like, really? We're meeting up again here in the Final Four. Like, it's hard to believe, but I'm incredibly happy for them. And just proud of the success that their programs had, and I know they feel the same way about us. And if you're gonna play somebody you care about, you might as well make it in the Final Four, where at least one of you guys will have an opportunity to go win the national championship in the next game you play in.
You beat Auburn at Auburn earlier this season. How do you do it again on Saturday?
We played really, really well in that game. We rebounded well. We made a lot of shots. I think we made 13 threes. We were physical. I thought we played a complete game, and we're going to have to do it again, to be victorious. Obviously, I think Auburn's back to playing some really, really good basketball. They played really well in the second half against Michigan after getting down, and then they looked like themselves for 40 minutes against Michigan State. So, kind of getting Auburn and getting back to their peak, I think is going to be a big challenge for us. And, we should have some confidence because we've had success against them earlier in the year. But we got to also understand that we got to play about our A game here on Saturday if we want to stay alive for Monday's championship game.
Todd, does your life feel like a movie right now with how quickly all of this has happened?
Yeah, it feels a little surreal, but we've worked hard to get here, man. And I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with a great staff, and we've recruited really, really well, guys that really are excited about being here at Florida. And, did it happen a little faster than we expected? Maybe. But it's all the function of great work done by a lot of people pulling the same direction.
If your life was a movie, who plays Todd Golden?
You're not getting me on that, man. I'm gonna let you can ask Kyle Smith next time you talk to him and see what he says. I'll let him take the reins on that.
Fair enough. Well, Todd, we appreciate a couple minutes, know how busy you are. Congratulations on all your success, and look forward to seeing you and the Gators in San Antonio.
Good talking to you, John. I'll talk to you soon, brother. Take care.
You got it. It's Florida head coach Todd Golden. I'm John Rothstein. Remember, we sleep in May.
She knows, and I know she knows.
All right, we'd like to thank Florida head coach Todd Golden for joining us. I want to take a couple more questions here in the chat before we get into some last-minute things. Brinks Pinks wants to talk St. John's. He says, is Wilcher the starting PG next year? He's talking about St. John's. I would expect St. John's to be very, very aggressive. Very, very aggressive in the guard market. Very, very aggressive in the guard market. I mean, the guards that they have against Simeon Wilcher, Jozon Sannon are good pieces, but I would expect St. John's to add a marquee guard. Marquee guard. Zero Dark Rogan says, was so funny when you pushed back on Wally when he said this is the greatest team ever. Look, Wally I love like a brother. He is like my brother. That's how close we are. But he sometimes says things that I don't always agree with. Now, look, if Duke wins the next two games by 15 points, you could make the case that in terms of performance, this was obviously, potentially, one of the better Duke teams that we have seen. But until that happens, I'm not so sure. I want to see how, and obviously the Houston game, like I said, is going to be like a heavyweight championship fight. There's no doubt about that. Let's see who else. Let's get one more in right here. Ryan Moran wants to know, John, how did Kevin Willard become such a hot commodity after one Sweet 16 thanks to an off the glass from a kid that was going to Maryland? Look, Kevin Willard is going to be, the next Villanova coach, which we know. He is obviously the Final Four, or he is, in the Sweet 16 head coach and so on and so forth. For the first time, Maryland lost to Florida last week. Look, here's the bottom line. Kevin Willard has deep roots in the Big East. Kevin Willard led Seton Hall, which is one of the toughest jobs, one of the toughest power conference jobs in the country, to a Big East tournament championship in 2016. Who did he beat? He beat Jay Wright and Villanova. Villanova went on that year to win the national championship. Kevin Willard was attracted to the finances and the NIL situation at Villanova, and I can't blame him. Because Villanova is second to none when it comes to investing in its men's basketball program. And, here's the thing about Villanova. The health of that campus pretty much is contingent on how the men's basketball program is doing. Now, I said last week and went on a long, long discussion about how, and a long, long rant about how, whoever the next Villanova coach is, and we thought it was going to be Kevin Willard, and it is Kevin Willard, cannot be judged by the last 10 years of Jay Wright. But I will say this, with Kevin Willard and with the resources that Villanova has, I expect Villanova to be in the NCAA tournament every single year. And I expect in time Villanova to be competing for a spot in the top 20 or top 15 every single year because the resources are there in place. Significantly more. Significantly more. Three quick hits right now as we wrap things up. Retention still matters. The top 4 teams remaining in the NCAA tournament, the top 4 seeds in the NCAA tournament, Florida, Duke, Houston, and Auburn, played a combined 29 players double-figure minutes in the Elite Eight. 20 of those players were in their respective programs last season. 4 were freshmen, 5 were transfers. So 20 of the 29 players who played for the teams that won in the Elite Eight this past weekend were in their respective programs last season. I said it to Todd Golden a couple minutes ago. I'm going to say it again. Everybody wants to get so excited. And look, we're guilty of it. We just were talking about what Bryce Hopkins' addition means to St. John's next year. But everybody wants to talk about the commitments. Who's coming in? It makes for great chatter at the bar, at the gym. I get it. Retention is what matters in college basketball. And the 4 teams that are playing in the Final Four reiterate that. What's going on in Kansas? Kansas, for the first time ever in the last 2 years, lost double-digit games back-to-back seasons under Bill Self. It has been the worst 2-year stretch that Kansas has had ever under Bill Self. And now it looks like Kansas is about to embark on one of the most pivotal off seasons that it has had under Bill Self. Bill Self is one of the best college basketball coaches of the last 2 or 3 decades. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's won multiple national championships. He is not immune to the climate right now in the sport. It can get anybody, and it's getting Kansas a little bit right now. Kansas, after what it did last year in the transfer portal and the last 2 years, in the last 2 years, it added Hunter Dickinson, it added A.J. Storr, it added Ryland Griffin, it added all these players, and Kansas had, again, the worst 2-year stretch that it's had ever under Bill Self. Double-digit losses in each season. Now, Kansas, since it was done playing, and since I was forecasting in my grids who was going to be back for the Jayhawks next year, these 4 players who still have remaining eligibility, Flory Badunga, Raquise Passmore, Ryland Griffin, and David Diggy Coit have all entered the transfer portal. And remember, Kansas's top 4 players from last year, Zeke Mayo, Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, and DeJuan Harris, have exhausted their eligibility. Bill Self's going to hope to get Marco Jackson back from an injury, who missed last season. He's bringing in, obviously, a 5-star guard in Darren Peterson. But other than that, what is left for Kansas? This is going to be, in my opinion, as pivotal of an offseason, and maybe the most pivotal offseason that Kansas has ever had under Bill Self, because here's what you got to remember. And I've been saying this, and I'm going to say it again. Just because you get commitments, just because you get guys who have a certain cachet, that doesn't mean you are going to have a great basketball team. 24 losses in the past 2 years for the Jayhawks. Now, one of the bigger commitments we have seen out of the transfer portal, and it happened late last week, Donovan Dent, the New Mexico transfer, announced his commitment to Mick Cronin and UCLA, and this to me is an absolute game changer for the Bruins. You watch UCLA last year, and I do not want to denigrate or disparage anybody who played the position, but UCLA did not have adequate point guard play and hasn't had adequate point guard play since Tiger Campbell left the program a couple of years ago. UCLA with average to below average point guard play, won 23 games, and went to the second round of the NCAA tournament where it lost to Tennessee. If you're telling me that Mick Cronin is adding an All-American like Donovan Dent at point guard, and that's the Bruins point guard, and he is joining Sky Clark, Eric Daly, Tyler Bilodeau, Adai Mara, Trent Perry, 2 guys who redshirted, who I think will be good role players I saw in practice, Eric Freeney and Brandon Williams. UCLA is a top 10, maybe higher team to start next season. Now, the Bruins need to add more. That's a great defensive team that I just mentioned, but they need to add more shooting. They could probably use another post player. But there is a nucleus in place right now for UCLA next season to have its best team since Mick Cronin had a team that went to the Sweet 16 in 2023 and lost to Gonzaga on that Julian Strawther shot. That came after, obviously, UCLA started 27-4, lost Jalen Clark, the National Defensive Player of the Year, to a season-ending Achilles injury, and lost to Dem Bona, the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year, to a shoulder injury. Donovan Dent going to UCLA changes the Bruins. UCLA still has work to do, but UCLA, for the first time since Tiger Campbell, has a point guard. Would like to thank Florida head coach Todd Golden for joining us here. I will be back. Keep posted for future shows on social media. For one more day, this is March.